you come here at 9:30?
What?
Did you come here at 9:30?
Here?
Yeah, no, okay, because we start at 10.
Well, what time is it? Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I came here at 10,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. I'm like, I
He
see
came
it.
at 9:30.
Yeah, I know. It got changed so we could go to conference, you know.
Oh. What happened to the conference?
Was good. We talked the debt ceiling, and you know, I think we're gonna put as much in it, so we give Kevin as much to negotiate with as possible.
I'm for that.
I'm for that too. So I think we make it as robust as we possibly can. All right, and gives him the most amount that he can negotiate with.
And if he does that, then we can explain it back on.
There you go. And I told him.
Because I can't.
I told him the IRS has to be in there. You know,
You're damn right it does.
you gotta believe it.
And they're spending that money just as fast as they can.
Yes, they can. Yep. It's funny. On the way up here, I was listening to an ad by Delta. You know, they put their little ads on the back of the seat in front of you.
Yeah.
And it said, we're 80,000 strong, we're unstoppable. And I thought to myself, and the IRS is 87,000, and they're going to be unstoppable too if we
Yeah.
don't allow it.
$80,000, $80,000 more.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, but you know what? I did when it was, but don't expect me to. I did. I just don't like it, and that's why I told you to do it. I did. Text Megan and ask her when I'm doing the one because I'm third. I put it down third on the seat. So if I have to go back downstairs at 10, isn't that when morning happens? So yeah, for sure. You can't put down your spot and then say it's for meeting 5 minutes. It just doesn't work that way. Yeah. Judge, I think I'm gonna get my steps in, go back and forth to Rayburn. Yeah, exactly. Today. Going back and forth to Rayburn today because we got other subcommittees over there.
Yeah,
And we got them all the way over here.
Well, this one always is right here. This is kind of a hideaway place.
Yeah.
Don't know where there are people either.
Good morning. How are you? Thank you for being here. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Good morning, Al.
How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good to see you.
You too.
Good morning.
How you doing?
Mr. Chairman.
They don't roll very good, do they? These chairs don't roll very good.
Subcommittee will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Our witness this morning is Stephen, is it Dadelbach? Dadelbach, Director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. I'll begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. The fiscal 24 budget request for the ATF totals $1.9 billion, which is a 7.4% increase over the fiscal 23 enacted level. The primary criminal enforcement mission of the ATF is to protect the public from violent crime. And while the ATF's budget request attempts to assure us its resources are directed toward the most serious offenses and most dangerous criminals, some recent decisions tell another story. Many folks are justifiably concerned about sweeping, seemingly poorly reasoned new rules emanating from the ATF in recent months. In one case, the ATF changed the operative definition of rifle in the Code of Federal Regulations such that pistols with attached stabilizing braces will be subjected to heightened federal regulation. Under another rule, the ATF is now requiring gun dealers to retain transaction records for the entirety of their licensed activities as opposed to the last 20 years, and redefined frame to crack down on privately made firearms. Under the new rule on stabilizing braces, otherwise lawful gun owners could face up to 10 years in prison and thousands of dollars in fines if they fail to register pistols with stabilizing braces with the ATF. If that weren't enough, the fiscal 24 budget reveals a separate effort to roll back Second Amendment protections. It proposes to eliminate several long-standing gun riders and repeal several Second Amendment protections from permanent law. This, along with the ATF's aggressive regulatory agenda, reveals a multifaceted effort to eliminate freedoms not even associated with the criminal misuse of firearms. When it comes to protecting Americans from violent crime, the Justice Department has my full support for locking up straw purchasers, prosecuting buyers who lie on their background check forms, and increasing prosecutions and penalties for gun theft, particularly from gun dealers. The fact is, there is a lot that can be done to keep guns out of the hands of felons that does not involve requiring a disabled vet to register his adapted pistol or removing a long-standing rider related to obscure firearms. Nevertheless, it's clear where this administration has chosen to direct its efforts. The American people can't be blamed for wondering why the government seems more intent on focusing its efforts on the law-abiding public than on doing the hard work of enforcing the law on people committed to breaking it. The complexity of violence and the very nature of criminal behavior make predicting and preventing incidents of violence extremely difficult. We in Congress want to ensure that funding is used effectively and that it isn't used to support oppressive new regulations in the name of crime prevention. America's national debt out of control, and we continue to pay the price for runaway federal spending. We must examine all agencies and programs to find efficiencies and savings and prioritize our scarce resources for those ATF efforts that have a demonstrable impact on public safety. Today, I'm sure we'll have some questions about inefficiencies at the ATF, and we will examine whether some ATF's policies are actually counterproductive. Finally, in light of our charge to eliminate wasteful government spending, ATF's budget would benefit from much greater transparency. The entirety of ATF's budget justification, which reflects the agency's diverse mission, is reduced to 2 decision units, making it difficult for Congress to appropriate funding with any degree of precision. Before we proceed, I want to recognize my ranking member, Mr. Cartwright, for any remarks he may wish to make.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, and
Morning.
thank you.
Morning.
And I'd like to join you in welcoming Director Dettelbach in his first appearance before our subcommittee to discuss the FY 2024 appropriation for alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives, better known as ATF. Welcome. The enforcement authorities at ATF extend beyond what I assume will be a large focus of today's hearing. I am supportive of oversight for the ATF. I believe ATF's important role in gun violence prevention, along with other federal, state, and local law enforcement partners, is one that deserves the attention of Congress on a bipartisan basis. Certainly, we all know the number of mass shootings in this country continue to rise in a new post-pandemic reality, with at least 4 deadly mass shootings just last week at a bank in Kentucky, a funeral home in Washington, D.C., a pool party in North Carolina that took the life of a 15-year-old girl, and an Indiana park where individuals were gathered in memory of a 19-year-old who was fatally shot the day before. All of these occurred just last week. This fails to mention the loss of life among our country's most innocent in the last year in places where our children should be focusing on their future by learning in our nation's classrooms. A recent poll found that 1 in 5 Americans have lost a family member who was fatally shot. This is a new normal that we simply cannot sustain. I was proud to support the bipartisan Safer Communities Act last year, which was an important first step in addressing gun violence prevention efforts at all levels of government. Further, as reflected in ATF's Crime Guns report released in February of this year, after a 20-year hiatus, we have a better understanding of the true threats to our communities from firearms used in crimes. We now know privately made firearms, or so-called ghost guns, recovered by law enforcement have grown 1,000% since 2017, a problem flagged early on as a growing risk to public safety and law enforcement by organizations such as the International Association of Chiefs of Police. We also now know that the time to crime for most legally purchased firearms is less than 3 years. From 2017 to 2021, 1 million lawfully purchased firearms were stolen, and largely from private citizens who had no intention to do any harm. This type of information is crucial for our state, local, and federal law enforcement, and long overdue. And it is more important than ever to ensure that ATF has the resources you need to respond to these types of incidents and provide tracing information at the request of partner law enforcement agencies as expeditiously as possible. DOJ has previously confirmed in its March 18th letter to the committee that cuts to the ATF budget would increase trace times at the National Tracing Center by more than 2 months due to reduced staff, and also result in fewer ATF special agents available to assist local law enforcement in communities across the country. Let's not forget, outside of firearms, ATF special agents are responding to and partnering with federal, state, local, and international law enforcement agencies in crimes involving explosives, bombings, and explosive threats. ATF also is the only U.S. government agency with fire and arson investigation as part of its core mission. The specialized training and forensic expertise ATF brings to partner law enforcement agencies is invaluable. So, Director Dettelbach, I look forward to hearing how the investments you are requesting in the FY 2024 bill will help to make our communities safer and support our state and local law enforcement in combating gun violence. So once again, welcome, and I look forward to your testimony. Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Mr. Dettelbach, you're recognized for an opening statement. Without objection, your written statement will be entered into the record. I would ask that you try to keep your statement to 5 minutes so we can have additional time for questions. Sir, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cartwright, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation. firearms violence.
Sir, would you turn your mic on there?
I am so sorry, and I won't start over. That's what we do at ATF. Keeping the American people safe from violent crime is our top priority. Every day, ATF partners with local, state, tribal, territorial, and federal law enforcement to disrupt, investigate, and refer for prosecution violent criminals. ATF is a small law enforcement agency with a huge mission. We embody the Department of Justice commitment to combating violent crime as a force multiplier with our state and local law enforcement partners. ATF employees bring to that partnership state-of-the-art tools and techniques aimed at protecting communities from firearm crime, while also respecting constitutional rights of individuals to keep and bear arms. We try to help catch bad guys in many different ways, just a couple or a few. For instance, by enforcing the national firearms laws as passed by Congress through an integrated law enforcement and regulatory strategy that prioritizes career criminals, violent gangs, criminal organization, and domestic and international firearms trafficking. Second, through our expertise in crime gun intelligence. For example, we operate the nation's only crime gun tracing facility and generate leads from there and from the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, or NIBIN, to our law enforcement partners to help them in real time to solve firearm crimes and track the unlawful movement of firearms to those who shouldn't have them. Third, by developing and employing technology that enables the increasing ability to recover touch DNA from cartridge casings and crime guns. This is incredibly exciting in the law enforcement community. Fourth, by conducting proactive investigations into emerging threats for people who want to endanger the public by breaking the law, such as the unlawful manufacturing and distribution or sale of privately made firearms, and those privately made devices now increasingly include 3D printed machine gun conversion devices, a very serious law enforcement threat. Fifth, by processing the registration and transfer of firearms and items under the National Firearms Act. And sixth, and by no means last, by being the world's foremost experts in explosives and arson crimes, which help law enforcement everywhere. As a former federal prosecutor for over 2 decades, under administrations of both parties, I know firsthand how important it is to address violent crime using evidence-based solutions. ATF uses the tools and resources Congress provides to do just that. Last year, Congress gave us some additional tools by passing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That measure helps us to use new means and statutes to combat gun crime. Although ATF is already aggressively working to implement and enforce the BSCA, no additional funds have yet been appropriated for ATF to implement this new law. We are requesting resources to do that now, and the President's budget reflects ATF's needs in fighting violent crime. I go around the country and try to work with our partners in our offices. I am constantly asked by police chiefs, sheriffs, mayors, community leaders, business leaders from all over the country for more ATF resources. And they're all asking, and unfortunately, the vast majority of them are correct. We are a small agency. That's why I'm here today. ATF's critical role in combating violent crime with our state and local partners is dependent, of course, on Congress providing adequate funding to allow ATF to effectively implement the tools we have to support our law enforcement mission. ATF is thankful for the funding that Congress has appropriated this past fiscal year. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. This year's funding has allowed us to perform our important work and maintain strong relationships with our law enforcement partners so we can continue to support them in fighting violent crime every day. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, before I close, I just want to mention that tomorrow is the anniversary of a tragedy for our nation. On April 19th, 1995, probably all remember where we were. Timothy McVeigh parked a rental truck in front of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And the truck was actually a massive bomb, and it brought down a significant portion of the building, killing 168 innocent people, including 19 children. And countless more were injured by that terrorist act, including brave ATF employees who were at our offices in the building that day. And by the way, who got up and spent decades after that working, continuing to work to fight violent crime. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to be present at the memorial ceremonies in Oklahoma City, marking the occasion and paying our respects, as I'm sure we all share, to those whose lives were lost or changed by that horrible day in 1995. Chairman Rogers, thank you very much for this invitation. Ranking Member Cartwright and members of the subcommittee. I look forward to answering the questions that you have. Thank you.
We join you in your tribute to the victims in Oklahoma City. So thank you, Director. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule. I'll begin by recognizing myself. Mr. Director, during the Obama administration, the ATF concluded that pistol brace devices do not turn a pistol into a short barrel rifle. Last year, however, this administration reversed this policy, now classifying pistols with a stabling brace as a short-barreled rifle. That gizmo was invented by a man who wished to help a vet use his pistol, which otherwise he would not be able to. That's where it came from. This misguided reversal, however, will now require law-abiding Americans to register these firearms and pay a tax on them to own them legally. Conventional rifles and pistols are not regulated under the National Firearms Act, right?
Congress makes the rules and determines which items are subject to regulation under the NFA, and ATF implements and enforces what Congress says. Short-barreled rifles have since 1934 been deemed, and I think the words of Congress were unusually dangerous under the National Firearms Act, and are not banned, and the rule does not ban anything, but you are correct, it subjects items under the National Firearms Act to additional regulations as Congress has determined.
And by the ATF's own estimation, a pistol with an attached stabilizing brace is both less destructive than a rifle and less concealable than a pistol. Yet the ATF is determined to make all owners of such firearms register them. How is this not a blatant attack on Americans' Second Amendment rights?
Well, let me repeat that it is Congress that makes the laws and ATF that is charged with implementing them. And we do believe, and the first court to rule on this matter, it's in litigation, has ruled that ATF acted within the rule, within the statute, I mean, as the language of the statute in writing this rule. Now, we do want to influence public safety, right, at ATF. That is what I said our goal is. That is our goal, Mr. Chairman. And these items, as you said, short-barreled rifles, as Congress has said, are unusually dangerous. Now, defining what is a short-barreled rifle was going on for about a 10-year period, and I think you referred to that as people would present items to ATF. Now, a couple things were going on. First, the nature of the items that were being manufactured in our private marketplace were changing. So the initial item presented to ATF bears little resemblance to many of the items that are covered by the rule. And individuals, we put forward factoring criteria in the rule. If people are making devices that are meant to be held with, braced on the forearm and held with one arm and not shouldered, right? The rule, by the application of the factoring criteria, should find that those are not those are not covered as short-barreled rifles. Many of the items that were being manufactured were made to be shouldered, and we set forward criteria that subjected those items to the same rules as a short-barreled rifle would be if it was sold in one piece. So the idea is we are implementing the statute as passed by Congress. Now, I will also, it's important to make this statement, Mr. Chairman, I think the ATF was inconsistent in many of its rulings up in that period as things were changing. And there are parts of these opinions that talk about various things. I don't think anybody, there's no opinion that just said blatantly every stabilizing brace is okay. But ATF said that in our rulemaking, and we're attempting to correct that inconsistency to provide clarity as to the features on a weapon that will cause it to be a short-barreled rifle.
Well, if a person with a disability, such as a disabled veteran, if that person needs a brace to stabilize their firearm against their shoulder to be usable, will ATF make an exception so that the person don't have to register that firearm with the government and pay $200 in order to exercise their Second Amendment rights?
Well, with respect to those items that are in the community and have been, we have made an exception, which is we have said that we have waived the entire payment of fees for items that were in the community that people owned prior to the implementation of the rule. And the reason for that was in part that there was some inconsistencies. It didn't seem fair to do that. With respect to things going forward, new items that are in commerce, the rule will be applied to the item. We have a classification function. We will look at the items. The experts at ATF will look at them and apply that rule, which comes from the statute, in order to make a determination as to whether the item is a short-barreled rifle. Mr. Chairman, Congress was correct in determining that short-barreled rifles are unusually dangerous. I mean, this isn't something that just lives in the 30s with the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The shooting at Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee, was accomplished with something that I believe, when it's fully examined, will be a short-barreled rifle. The Dayton mass shooting, the mass shooting in Boulder, Colorado, Club Q. So Congress was correct to make that determination, and it is our job to try and take what Congress did and make sure that we're using it to protect the American people.
How much do you anticipate it'll cost the agency in fiscal '23 to process applications and tax payments on these firearms?
I do not have a specific number. I can get back to you with a number as to what we anticipate. It depends on the number of applications that are filed. In order to implement the National Firearms Act, though, it is difficult to separate it. So for instance, if we do a search warrant, Mr. Chairman, and this is, I'm going to anonymize it, but this is typical. We do a search warrant on a drug organization, a gang, and Latin Kings, what have you. We go into the garage, we find, whatever, a kilo of coke, a bunch of handguns, and several short-barreled rifles. Right? It's hard to break up that search warrant. It's one enforcement activity. But with respect to the specific questions that you asked, we have surged resources to try and make sure we're processing these applications safely. One of the things we are doing is trying to do that separate from our normal NFA processing functions, because I think, as you know, as many members have said, we have a backlog of those. So we want to process these applications and still try to decrease the turnaround times for the other NFA items.
Well, get us the number.
Of course, Mr. Chairman.
And don't flutch it up. Just be factual. Mr. Carlyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Dettelbach, as I mentioned in my opening statement, there is talk of cuts to agencies in FY24. There has been even more direct talk about ATF as part of that calculation. A 22% cut below your FY 2023 budget. If you subtract out one-time construction costs, that'd take you to $1.3 billion, which is roughly the same level of funding ATF received in fiscal year 2018. Since 2018, the number of mass shootings has almost doubled, from 338 to 647 in 2022. The number of children and teens injured or killed by firearms has grown 42% since 2018. Our state and local police are more overwhelmed than ever. And the proposal to reduce funding for the federal agency that these agencies rely on to help them bring criminals to justice seems misguided. Director Dettelbach, what are some of your biggest concerns as they relate to these proposed cuts to your agency when clearly the workload has increased?
As I said in my statement, Congressman, the ATF is a small agency with a very large mission. It's not just over the past 5 years, over the past several decades. ATF has not significantly grown as firearms violence and violent crime in our country has grown, and we have not grown to match other federal law enforcement agencies who have grown significantly during that period. And so what that means is when we cut into bone. The vast majority of ATF's operations are on the criminal enforcement side. It's 75% of the requests that we submitted under the administration. And even the 25% includes things like the lab that processed the DNA request that the sheriff in Tulare County, California used to catch the Goshen killer who put 5 bullets in a 10-month-old baby's head. So if these cuts are enacted, it would hurt public safety. It would hurt agent safety. We would have to pull officers from task forces with our local partners. We would not be able to investigate significant resources that are required in firearms trafficking offenses. Gang investigations would suffer. Processing times under the NFA would suffer. We'd take longer to turn around the traces that our state and local partners need and depend on when homicide investigators are out there working on a case in cities and counties around the country. So, and more. It would be a very significant effect on our core operations, our core law enforcement function, and it would hurt our state and local partners.
When you talk about state and local partners, you're talking about ATF providing expert services and investigative insight to state police forces, to city police forces, to local municipality police forces. Is that correct?
That and more, boots on the ground, working with them on cases, going through doors with them, executing search warrants with them, and providing that crime gun intelligence to them that helps them to identify trigger pullers. Now, most data out there show that there's this many people who commit crimes in this country, right? There's a far smaller group of shooters and trigger pullers. And we now have the data to share with our local law enforcement partners to identify the trigger pullers better than ever before and get them off the streets and behind bars where they belong, because trigger pullers pull the trigger more than once. Most data shows they repeat in terrorizing our community. So the ability to tell a local police department who those most dangerous people are and to work with them on the case together is what would be impacted.
Well, now, Director Dettelbach, you were a U.S. attorney. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
You're all about catching bad guys, aren't you?
I was an assistant U.S. attorney too, and I'm sometimes more, I want to tell people that too. I actually worked for a living. So for many years, I'm kidding, but yes, of course, we worked on violent crime task forces all over my district to try and catch dangerous folks.
A cut of 22% to ATF, what immediate actions would you be forced to take if you had to suffer that kind of cut?
As I said, it would impact almost immediately our ability to work with state and local law enforcement on gang cases, on violent crime cases.
And bad guys would get away, isn't that right?
They would get away, and you know, if they get away, they unfortunately act and hurt people again.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Mr. Director, I failed to thank you for your comments regarding the terrible shootings in Louisville and the other places, so thank you for those words. Judge Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. Glad to have you here. I got involved with suppressors when a father came to me and said, I've got an autistic child, and I want him to go deer hunting with me. But the noise from the rifle, he can't stand it. And so I started trying to get a suppressor. And the the government is interfering with me being able to get a suppressor by delaying their side of processing suppressors. Getting involved with that, I want to tell you that in 2013, ATF launched an electronic program for firearm owners to purchase suppressors and other firearm accessories. However, this system was taken down in April of 2014 due to technical issues. The previous ATF director promised it would be back online in a short period of time and processing would be reduced to 100 days. However, the e-form system was not launched again until December of 2021 and has done little to streamline the process of purchasing suppressors and other firearms accessories. I'd like these questions to be answered. Why did it take 7 years for ATF to relaunch the new e-form system? The committee has provided you with ample funding over the years. Why is the e-form system still experiencing issues? How has the funding been used to update the system? And finally, according to ATF website, it takes an average of 270 days, or about 9 months, for processing applications. The initial promise for processing applications was supposed to be 100 days. Why are the applications taking so long? And I want all those questions answered.
Yeah, so I don't know that I can answer all of them today. I can follow up, but I'll tell you what I can answer today, of course. So Congressman, as you said, the system, the electronic processing system is back up and running. I would agree with you that the processing times are too long. We have recently surged resources to try and get more people working on those. We're dealing with two issues that are related at once, which is one where there's still a backlog of those paper applications, and at the same time, you have the electronic system. I think actually the number I checked before I came over, I think the most recent number is a little less than you said, but it's still too long. I think it's a month shorter. We're going to continue to work to drive those numbers down. It is a legitimate question and concern. It is not our intent to interfere with or to in any way delay. It's just taking too long to process these applications, and I commit to you that we will work on it. As to what happened during that period where the system was down, I've been at ATF now for 8 months or so. I do not know what happened back then. I can check into it, obviously, for you.
Get that information. I would like to have that, please.
Of course.
And you know, this is not James Bond. These are American citizens who have hearing issues. My roommate is a hunter, our college roommate, and now he's deaf as a post because of shooting deer with a rifle. It helps people with their hearing. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing to have a suppressor on a rifle. And anybody that thinks it is mistaken. So I would appreciate very much if you would give me the information I asked for in detail.
Of course, and, you know, obviously, our authority begins with Congress, right? So Congress identified, not ATF, it was Congress that identified in the National Firearms Act suppressors as being subject to these increased regulatory scheme, but the processing times
But not
are...
delaying them till it becomes so onerous that the person says, I give up, I'll shoot without it.
That would not be proper. I agree with that. That is not our intent, and we need to get those processing times lower.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at your requests for budget increases, some of them to parts of your budget over 10%, 12% increase in your salaries. I want to talk about overreach and mismanagement within your agency, both regarding the collection of information and the seizure of firearms. First, I want to talk about last year's IG report, audit of the Bureau of ATF, explosive firearm disposal practice, and how your agency lost thousands of guns and gun parts in your possession. As the report notes, since September 2015, the ATF has utilized the National Disposal Branch, formerly the National Firearms and Ammunition Destruction Branch, to centralize and streamline the disposal process of forfeited and ATF-owned firearms. Each year, the ATF destroys thousands of firearms at the NDB. But the IG undertook the audit following the discovery that thousands of firearms, firearm parts, and ammunition had been stolen from the NFAD from 2016 to 2019. The theft, perpetrated by a former contract security guard stationed at your ATF facility in Martinsburg, West Virginia, were found by accident during a traffic stop. And the report stated further that the ATF has implemented new control procedures to reduce the risk, but the ATF has not implemented all improvements to NDB operations recommended over 3 years ago. Director, what type of security procedures are required by private gun dealers, and what would happen if a private dealer stored guns on top of vaults instead of inside them, or left keys lying around, maybe even propped exterior doors open, or left a wide array of guns available for just anyone to grab, as this was done at your Martinsburg facility?
With respect to what happened at Martinsburg, from what I understand, from reviewing the reports and talking to individuals, as you say, there was a criminal activity that we were victimized by at ATF, and out of that came increased security and controls we have, which we do have and are working to make sure that
3 years later.
It obviously, you're correct, there was a vulnerability. The vulnerability was addressed. I think we all would wish the vulnerability would be addressed beforehand. With respect to your question about people in the firearms industry, gun dealers.
Mm-hmm.
So we work together with the NSSF in partnership to try to make sure we're doing our best to support and educate firearms dealers on having secure stores, the things that they can do. ATF responds to every single burglary or robbery of a firearms dealer in the United States.
Well, they're required to notify you within 48 hours, right?
And hopefully it's quicker and we go that night, because those are serious crimes. There is a range among firearms dealers in terms of how much security they implement.
Well, I'm glad you think it was serious, what happened at your Martinsburg facility. Now, you've implemented, or you're attempting to implement, a new zero-tolerance policy. Would you deem this a willful violation that greatly affects public safety and ATF's ability to trace firearms recovered in violent crimes, for which a revocation of the FFL's license would be the end result of such a violation?
Not sure what.
If we saw the same thing that happened at your Martinsburg facility happen with an FFL under your zero tolerance policy, wouldn't you move against their license immediately?
There are 5 specific violations that are set forth as triggering the Enhanced Enforcement Initiative. I don't think any of them relates to the storage of firearms. I suppose if somebody's willfully doing that, but the key word that Congress has told us is we can only revoke, have the power to revoke if somebody's engaging in a willful violation. So it's things like we contact you for a trace and you say, no, I'm not going to respond. You supply a firearm to a prohibited person. You fail to run a required background check. There's 2 more. But even those have to be done willfully, and we have due process. So we have a hearing. We've put out numbers on this, Congressman, and about half the people who proceeded to their hearing, actually, there was no revocation. So we were very careful to try to evaluate the evidence impartially to determine who is willfully violating the law.
Well, all right, let's move on. I think we should apply the same zero tolerance policy and give you all due process the same way you're moving against FFLs. As you know, FFLs have to give all of their firearm transactions records to ATF once they go out of business in an OBRA database, and prior to President Biden taking office, FFLs were allowed to destroy these records after 20 years, but a new rule mandates that they be kept in perpetuity now, and this is a concern that ATF is taking a backdoor approach to creating a federal firearms registry, despite intent to the contrary. So think that we have a problem with that, especially since you can't determine the number of prosecutions resulting from completed crime gun trace requests. We learned this in a letter that you responded to yesterday that was over a year old. So I would urge you to be swifter in your responses to this committee and actually consider the impact of
Time of the
your
gentleman
actions.
has
Thank you, Mr.
expired.
Chairman.
Mr. Clyde.
Thank you, Director. Earlier this year, on January 31st, the Federal Register published the rules for the ATF regarding pistol braces. So how much, I believe that rule, in that rule, you redefined the definition of a pistol with a brace to become a short-barreled rifle, and in my opinion, that exceeds the authority of ATF. That was not Congress's intent. How much did ATF spend in crafting and publishing the rule?
I don't have a specific figure that I can tell you how much ATF expended. I do know that there were over 200,000 comments that people from the public submitted in that rule, and that, as we are required to do under the Administrative Procedures Act, we examined all of those comments and actually took them into account in what the actual final rule would look like.
And, and yet, when ATF originally made the rule in 2012, they said that pistol braces did not convert a pistol into a short-barreled rifle. Then they changed that in 2015, right back to, no, you can't do this. And then in 2017, they said, oh, yes, you can. And now we're back to 2023, and now we're in 2023, and we're back to a pistol brace making a pistol into a short-barreled rifle. So very conflicting. A lot of time, I think, spent by ATF going back and forth, trying to figure out what I think they should not have been doing in the first place, and that is reclassifying a pistol as a short-barreled rifle, a pistol with a brace as a short-barreled rifle. Now, in this new rule, you say that people who have a pistol with a brace have 120 days in order 120 days to register them with the ATF. How can ATF justify that time frame? I mean, the Street Sweeper USAS 12 Striker 12 shotgun was reclassified as a DD about 30 years ago. So this is a similar situation. And that time frame was over 7 years. So, and you've got potentially 10 million to 40 million people that have pistols with braces. How can you say 120 days is sufficient time?
You mentioned that there were prior ATF rules, and I just want to say, Congressman, this is the first time on this topic that ATF has engaged in APA notice and comment rulemaking. People brought specific items
Fair enough,
to
they used
ATF
a
to
letter.
classify.
It was a letter back
But-
in 2012,
but it
and then a letter in 15, a letter in 2017. This is the actual first official rule. You are correct.
But what was happening during that period, which I agree to you, there were inconsistencies, and that was one of the reasons for the rule, is to try to clarify among those inconsistencies, because the products were changing, right, over time, and also you're right, there were inconsistencies. So with respect to the time frame.
Right, the 120 days.
Yeah, so as you know, because I saw you there, right, the day after the rule was issued, I went to Las Vegas and met with, at the SHOT Show with the NSSF, with individual gun owners, had a town hall. We launched a very significant education effort and campaign where thousands of FFLs have had the opportunity to learn about the rule. We are trying to get the word out, and when
So
for
do
us,
you or do you not think 120 days is a sufficient time?
I believe that if there are individuals out there who have these products, that they can begin the process. So in other words, if you,
I
we're
get
very
that,
clear,
but-
if you file an application,
I get
you're
that.
fine until we
So you
look at
think
the
then
application.
120 days is sufficient time? Yes or no? It's a
I
simple
think the
question.
way that we are doing this is a fair and appropriate way to have compliance with the National Firearms Act, yes.
Okay. So what will happen to those who never heard of the rule after 120 days? I mean, you've got potentially millions of people here. That's a heck of an ad campaign.
ATF will continue to enforce the laws as Congress has given us, we will of course prioritize people who present a public safety threat to the community. And it is not the object of the rule to play gotcha with law-abiding firearms owners. I would say to this, but for individuals who do know about it and who are trying to decide what to do, you can check with us as to whether your particular item is covered. And also, if you're
Director,
going...
let me ask you this.
Sure, of course.
Do you think it's acceptable for Congress to spend taxpayers' money on unauthorized programs?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Do you think it's acceptable for Congress to spend taxpayers' money on unauthorized programs? That is, programs that agents or agencies that are not currently authorized by Congress. You know, is that acceptable? Do you think it's legal? If something is completely unauthorized? I mean, we have authorizing committees and we have appropriating committees. This is an appropriating committee, all right? Is it acceptable?
Respectfully, I think that's several levels above my pay grade. Obviously, Congress makes the decision as to the appropriations that it passes. There are authorizing committees. I know I'm appearing before an authorizing committee of this body. No, in a week or so. And so I will leave any back and forth between the authorizers and the appropriators above my pay grade in this body, which is, in my humble view, where those kinds of discussions appropriately occur.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
I yield back.
Mr. Trone?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Holding this hearing, and Ranking Member Cartwright, thank you both. Director Detzelbach, did I get it? Close enough.
Close enough, yes, of course.
And we may not be above your pay grade. So I just heard my colleague, Mr. Clyde, talking about this race rule, which is fascinating. So we're struggling with horrific gun violence, you know, all over America. I mean, it never ends. Can you tell me more about this rule and what it's accomplished? And also, are there 10 to 40 billion pistols that someone put a brace on?
So with respect to the rule, the National Firearms Act passed by Congress.
They don't need
is the
it.
underlying statute.
They don't
We're trying
need
to make sure that we enforce, Congressman, and it says that short-barreled rifles are something that Congress deemed to be unusually dangerous and subject to increased regulation. The rule and the statute do not ban. They subject things to increased regulation. Over the years, right, products in the marketplace, in the free marketplace, change, and there were additional products that the Congressman's correct. We went back and forth with the industry on what qualified something to be a short-barreled rifle, and the rule is aimed at clarifying that. Now, this law that Congress passed was back in 1934, and as I said earlier, you don't have to look all the way back to understand why short-barreled rifles can be unusually dangerous. I mentioned, likely, although we haven't examined it, the school shooting in Nashville, the recent, the Dayton mass shooting, the shooting mass shooting in Boulder, Colorado, Club Q, and also in Colorado, are things that were accomplished with items that are short-barreled rifles. And what we seek to do is to take what Congress has said we should be doing and to apply it to the marketplace in a fair and appropriate way.
10 to 40 million?
We will see. We also gave in the rule the option for individuals who didn't want to register what they had, which is, I think, something that was the right thing to do, to break the weapon apart. So in other words, take the stabilizing brace off, and the business end of the firearm is yours without any obligation or registration, so long as it's not otherwise prohibited or regulated, you can have it. Again, trying to create ways. So there could be a portion of people who just say, you know what, I don't feel like filling out the form, even though it's free, I'm breaking it apart, and I got my gun, and I'll put my stabilizing brace on a long-barreled item, and they wouldn't have to do anything.
Okay, sounds like you're on the right track, and continue on. Trafficking, fentanyl, we've got to stop the fentanyl. The Mexican government is not cooperating, stopping the fentanyl in large part. What they've asked us to do is stop the guns, the gun trafficking that's coming across the southern border in huge droves, and has turned Mexico into virtually a gun narco state, where they don't control 90% of the provinces are controlled by the cartels, who have their own weaponry. So what can we do the help, I mean, the Biden administration has given extra funding to ATF, which we think has been underfunded, and now the conversation is to cut that funding back to 22 levels. And I just want to stop the fentanyl. The Mexican government says, help us stop the guns, so they stop killing everybody. So, seems like those are good things. So, tell me how these budget cuts would hurt the agency's ability to stop the firearms that are ending up to the cartels.
So, Congressman, from my many years as a prosecutor and now at ATF, one thing I can tell you is that guns and drugs go together in many cases. Firearms are unfortunately all too often illegal tools of drug dealers to hurt people and enforce their regime. So we work together with our law enforcement partners on drug cases involving violent criminals, and we also work to try and cut off the unlawful supply of firearms going to the criminal element, right? Different from law-abiding citizens, of course. With respect to the border, we have 9 firearms trafficking task forces that are focused on border activity.
But if your budget's cut to 22, how's it going to hamper you? What's that mean? And more guns going to Mexico, which means more drugs coming here.
More drugs and more violence.
Bingo.
And so there's no way to cut that budget at those levels without seeing public safety effects for Americans and hurting our state and local law enforcement partners, the police departments, the sheriff's departments, who we work with all the time. We will have to end some of those enforcement activities. We will have fewer special agents. It will affect every part of our public safety mission.
I know I'm over time, but you've got to get your data better on the GAO report of 2021 on guns coming across the border. You're not counting the Attorney General's in Mexico's findings. We need to count what the Mexicans take also, so we have better data.
And I would encourage you also, in addition, I hear you, to look at the firearms trafficking reports that the President and Attorney General directed us to put out. It is more information in one place on America's crime guns than has ever been put out before in the history of the country. It is, you can search it by state, 40 cities we've searched it for, and any city that wasn't in the 40, they can request us to run those numbers for them, and we will do it. It is a great law enforcement tool, but I hear you on...
Get all the Mexican agencies' data together so we have good data, the more the better. Thank you, I yield back.
Mr. Elsey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member. Director Dettelbach, did I get it right?
You absolutely
All right.
did. Thank you.
Thank you for being here today, and congratulations on your confirmation. I think it's essential for the leadership of any agency to have a permanent and Senate-affirmed director, and I know you've only been on for a short while, so congratulations for that. And I think, no matter how I feel about the ATF, it is important for leadership purposes for the direction of your agency to be clear and stable. So, as a foundational question, and I don't play Stump the Chump, I'm not out to get on a news bite, but I have some questions for you as the director that I'd like to understand about where you are personally. I've seen it read that in 2018, when you ran for Attorney General, that you said that all assault weapons should be banned. Is that a fair statement?
I certainly said that I was in that political campaign, which is far different from where I am now, although the administration's position is that there should be an assault weapons ban, to be clear. But I think what I said was that there should be an assault weapons ban. I think it would have been up to the Ohio legislature to try and determine, and it's hard work to determine what things are and are not covered, how you define those terms. That would have been my view, and as with any legislative body, they get to make those determinations.
But if you agreed with that, as a gun owner of many different types and a 20-year military veteran, I have some expertise in weaponry and self-defense weapons. What could you, in 15 seconds, would you define an assault weapon for me?
So
If you go past 15 seconds, I'll just interrupt you.
no, so I'll go shorter than that, because I honestly, I do think if Congress wishes to take that up, I think Congress would have to do the work, but we would be there to provide technical assistance. Unlike you, I'm not a firearms expert to the same extent as you may be, but we have people at ATF who can talk about velocity of firearms, what damage different kinds of firearms cause, so that whatever determination you chose to make would be an informed one.
Did you go to Harvard Law School?
I might have to plead
Okay,
guilty,
all
I'm
right.
sorry.
So the follow-up question is, as we've discussed, that we're losing wartime numbers of Americans to fentanyl coming across the border, a border that is porous. It doesn't matter the definition that you use of it, what that looks like. As you said, they go hand in hand. Drugs are coming across, guns are coming across. We have a gang problem in this country. How does ATF plan on fighting the gang issue? Because I see you shutting down a whole lot of federal firearms dealers. What are you doing in Chicago to shut down the gang violence in Chicago?
So we do a lot. So we are out there partnering with state and local law enforcement on task forces, on anti-gang efforts all over the nation. We have great other federal law enforcement agencies, but I'm very proud, and I saw this as a prosecutor for all those years. The culture at ATF is more to stand shoulder to shoulder in the streets, in the trenches with state and local law enforcement on these cases, because we're the violent crime focus, right? And that is in our constitutional system. State and locals have the lead most of the time on that. So we work all the time on those. We have done, outlaw motorcycle gang cases, Latin Kings, Crips, Bloods, almost every gang you can imagine. And that's just since I have gotten here, and multiple times we work on those cases. It's a very important problem. You are correct.
Do you have undercover agents, and if so, do we have some in south of our border in cooperation?
So
with
I'm
the-
not going to comment on any undercover activities we may or may not have. Of course, ATF, like all law enforcement agencies, has an undercover function, but we're very, very careful about making sure we never say anything that would put somebody in danger.
I understand that as a military man, but I do want to point out, as I have a problem, and so many people on my side of the aisle do, with the ATF existing at all because of overreach. The NDB, you've lost thousands of weapons at the NDB prior to your time, I like to add. And from 2016 to 2019, very lax security standards at the NDB, National Disposal Bureau, right? And thousands of weapons that got stolen and then recirculated because there was no proof of them being sold anywhere. I'd like to know how the NDB has been cleaned up specifically since you took over.
So I think, first, nobody is more keenly aware of the issues at NDB than ATF, because agents had to go out into the field and do the hard and sometimes dangerous work of recovering the vast majority of those weapons, which, by the way, they did, not all, but the vast majority. In terms of the corrections, of course, the Inspector General's report comes up with specific recommendations, and we have worked very hard to adopt and implement those recommendations.
I just think that if there's going to be a no-fault mentality from this administration and the ATF concerning loss of weapons, from how you sell them to anything else, that the same no-fault mentality should be held to the ATF standard. My time's expired. Thank you very much, sir.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Morrell?
Thank you, sir. And Director, thank you for being here. We had a chance to meet last year with the Anti-Gun Task Force. Appreciate your service. I want to just ask a question, if I can. The second volume of the ATF report evaluating firearms trafficking, released this past February, reported that from 2017 to 2021, nearly 35,000 firearms were stolen from federally licensed gun dealers. What resources do you need that are necessary to strengthen the oversight of gun dealers and prevent stolen guns from being trafficked in the illegal into the illegal market?
And this sort of follows Congressman's question. So first of all, let me be clear. We work with the National Shooting Sports Foundation and the industry on these cases. We offer rewards together with them on these cases. These are serious crimes. Nobody drives a car through the front window of a gun dealer and runs in and grabs 20 guns to go hunting, right? Those guns are going straight to the street. They're going to hurt people. So we, first of all, respond to every single one that we're notified about. Think about that. That's many, many a year where we get up in the middle of the night and respond, and those are victims. The other thing I want to point out is we do not, to be clear, if a firearms dealer is burglarized, even if they didn't have the alarm system we wish they had, or even if they didn't lock the guns up the way that we want, they do not get their license revoked automatically or are part of any sort of enhanced enforcement policy because of that. We try to work with them to suggest ways that they can harden the target. So a lot of what we do in our regulatory function, both with respect to burglaries and inspections, is working collaboratively with well-intentioned firearms dealers who are often our first line of defense in preventing firearms trafficking, to harden the target so that, unscrupulous and criminal elements can't take advantage of them.
Well, but as I understand it, maybe you comment on this, the average inspection of gun dealers, gun stores is dramatically higher than the amount of years it's supposed to be. And there are 35,000 guns stolen, so that means there's clearly not enough hardening of facilities, in my view. But what kind of resources could you use to be able to address this problem?
So the IOIs, the Industry Operations Investigators out there all over the country, there are only about 800 of them. The regulated community is, depending on who you count and how you count and the applications, can be, near 100,000, if not at 100,000. And so we just simply do not have the resources that we would need to do our job effectively, even on some reasonable cycle. And it's just a reality that we deal with at ATF, and we will continue to do our best with what we get to try and protect the American people. Because it's not about holding, well-meaning gun dealers, and playing gotcha with them. It's about finding the very few. And we under the program, we revoked, I think, under 0.1% of firearms dealers. It's very few. And it's about helping those others to do the best they can to harden that target for the criminal gun traffickers out there who may try to take advantage of them.
So you have 800 inspectors. I think the federal law calls for inspections every 7 years. My understanding is taking about 14 years in between inspections. So would a doubling of the number of agents allow the inspections to occur? And frankly, whether you're, I assume most people are doing the right thing, but I get my car inspected every year. That doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong, but it does require an inspection. Everyone in the state of New York has an inspection every year, I assume everywhere around the country. So in order to do these inspections, you need, well, perhaps not Mr. Clyde's, you don't do inspections of vehicles in your state. Well, we do it in our state. So inspections are a necessary way of making sure that you're meeting standards. So what I'm asking is what resources would be necessary to meet that obligation?
Well, in the President's request has a significant number of increased resources for that function, and I think that would be a very, very important addition for us to be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish.
The National Tracing Center allows law enforcement agencies to submit crime gun trace request to ATF for processing. I understand fewer than half of the nation's law enforcement agencies utilized the program in 2021, which undermines your ability, as I understand, to identify, investigate, and prosecute gun traffickers and other bad actors. Can you talk about the consequences of underutilization with respect to crime and solve rates?
So the number of raw traces is going up and up and up. So it was a 13% increase year over year. However, you are correct that about half of all law enforcement agencies don't use the free resource that we provide for them to trace their crime guns. And that doesn't just hurt our mission. Respectfully, this is why I talk to local police departments all over the country. It can hurt their ability to solve firearms crimes. Highland Park is a great example. The July 4th shooter, the New York subway shooter. Those were cases where, because we got urgent traces and turned them around quickly, we were able to help local law enforcement identify a killer before they killed again. And so these are things that really support state and local law enforcement functions. And I hope that we will come to a place where when a crime gun happens, when a murder happens, when a homicide happens, when a shooting happens, when a drug dealer gets caught with a gun, that when law enforcement sees that firearm, they'll understand that it's just like fingerprinting. You wouldn't conduct the criminal investigation of the homicide without submitting the trace of the firearm, so that we can understand, more evidence about the case and help identify the killer.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Director. I want to start, do you agree law-abiding citizens have a legal right to possess firearms?
Yes, as long as they're not in a prohibited category that Congress has set forth, the Second Amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear arms.
This is a softball, right?
Right.
This is, yes, the answer is yes. And I focus on legal, law-abiding citizens that have a legal right. And look, I represent Uvalde. I know exactly what it's like to have to represent a community that has lost a lot. And when Uvalde happened, first off, that gunman should have never been able to purchase that firearm. Not because he was 18, not because it was an AR, because he was mentally unstable. And I think it's important that we keep firearms out of the hands of people that shouldn't have firearms. But at the same time, so after Uvalde happened, I got calls going, hey, Tony, we got to do something to keep our kids safe in our school, but don't take my guns away. Make sure they don't take my guns away. Literally the day after the shooting, I sat down with one of the fathers of one of the children that were killed. And that's exactly what he told me. He goes, make sure my other kids are safe, but make sure they don't take my guns away. This is the dilemma that I'm dealing with, and I think a lot of Americans are dealing with. And I want to focus on the legal aspect of it, because it feels as if a lot of Americans that are law-abiding citizens, that are following the rules, doing all the things they need to do, are getting roped up into the same category of criminals and some of these other areas. So I want to start there. Does your budget request adequately equip ATF's ability to improve and swiftly process firearms license applications?
Certainly to improve. That's a work in progress. It's necessary to do that work. I acknowledged before, I don't want to repeat myself and take your time, but so we need to do better on the wait times for NFA weapons.
I'm very interested in that. And, when we talk about the budget requests, I want to make sure the funds are going to be able to process requests. I'm talking about law-abiding citizens that are filling out all the applications that they have to in a manner that they're trying to be upfront. Just on our end, from a government standpoint, how do we get through that faster? How do we streamline it? How do we utilize technology?
Yeah, two ends of that question. The increase would help us to do it better, and to answer prior questions, cuts would most certainly hurt that process along with many others. I think that the electronic submission process, which has been referred to earlier, which recently came back online, or a couple years ago came back online, is one help. I do think we need to just surge resources to get through that paper backlog, which we are continuing to try to do. But to one thing that you said that I just want to, obviously, I understand the right to keep and bear arms, but it's important to, the reason why I was careful, I wasn't trying to be difficult, but we talk about law-abiding citizens. Somebody who has a mental illness is not a lawbreaker, right? And so, as you yourself said, what I say is we have the right to keep and bear arms under the Constitution as the courts define that term, and while none of these things on their own, this was frustrating, none of these things on their own is going to solve the problem. And that's frustrating sometimes. People want to have one thing. If we do this, it's over.
Right.
But to me, that is not a reason not to do anything.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'd say, too, is, look, throwing money at a problem never solves anything, okay? I'm going to look at what are you doing with that money, and when you come before this committee or your predecessor or whoever, you just got in the seat, so ideally you'll still be in the seat. But when you come before next year, because this train doesn't end. When you come next year, one of the things that we're going to look at is, what did you do with that money? Did wait times increase or did they decrease? I want to switch to folks that aren't law-abiding citizens, for if you will. The provisions in the Bipartisan Safer Community Act, which I voted in favor of, strengthens ATF's ability to identify, deter, and investigate those who illegally divert firearms from lawful commerce to violent criminals and trafficking organizations that supply gangs and extremists. Can you speak more to this agreement? How will ATF's role directly or indirectly collaborate collaborate efforts with our Mexican counterparts in curbing the fentanyl crisis?
As I said, drugs and guns oftentimes go together, especially when you're talking about criminal organizations, whether they are gangs or cartels or violent drug trafficking organizations. And we have established 9 firearms trafficking task forces all on the border, including in areas close to your district, to try and work on stemming the flow of firearms down into Mexico. And we also are working with our counterparts and the Mexican government. We have a good relationship. We're increasing the number of traces
Good.
that they're able to do.
Good.
It's a work in progress, but
Yeah.
we are working on it.
I'm out of time. I'm trying to basically go, I would love for you to spend more energy catching the bad guys and less energy hampering those law-abiding citizens that are filling out all the paperwork and doing all those things. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. There is a desire, I think, on behalf of a couple of members for a limited second round, briefly, because we're nearing the time that the witness has allotted for this purpose. So we'll have a limited second round, if that's okay with you, sir.
Of course, Mr. Chairman.
Let me ask you about the drug cartels. We just concluded a huge summit in Atlanta over last week. Mr. Cartwright was there with us and participated, but we had some 4,000 people. Practically all of the law enforcement agency heads like DEA, FBI, so on, ATF. We had people from all walks of life on the drug question, particularly fentanyl, and all of the evidence, of course, echoes around that the fentanyl is coming from from China, assembled and perfected in Mexico and shipped by the cartels across the U.S. in practically every community. I know this is not your direct responsibility, but ATF is a part of the answer. What can you tell us about the effect of the cartels, especially, on the flooding of this country with fentanyl?
I want to be careful not to speak where I'm not the expert, but of course, we are part of the effort, not just at the border, but all around the country to deal with this problem, because it is a national problem. The Appalachia Haida is fantastic. Vic Brown, fantastic. We work with them very closely. And, you know, when the cases that we have that are violent drug trafficking cases all over the country, whether it's in Ohio where I'm from or in Kentucky, a lot of them have links to the cartels now, right? This is a problem everywhere. And so, you know, we work very hard and spend a vast amount of time and resources dealing with these kinds of cases. Now, we try to get involved where we can add value, which are the cases where there's also a sort of a demonstrated link to gun violence, you know, that will be, because we have so few resources, right? We want to get bang for the buck. But we are there as a partner. We say yes to those cases. We go out on joint operations, dealing with those cases all over the country. And of course, dealing directly with our Mexican partners, we spend time working with them and trying to improve the amount of information that they can. This is a really, you're right, this is a heartbreaking and serious problem.
Just in the last few hours, the DEA administrator reported on a successful operation to arrest El Chapo's 2 sons in Mexico, and other arrests, and she'll be seeking extradition to this country. But can you speak to how we can engage the Mexican authorities more effectively?
We are trying to do that, and we are making some progress. So that if you look at the number of criminal referrals in the United States based upon traces run in crime guns in Mexico, that has increased the number of referrals significantly in the last year. If you look at the tracing numbers, that has increased. We will continue to, we have added at least one, I think opened one additional office in Mexico and added an agent, you know, to our cadre down there already. We're trying very hard to try and do what we can with those partners to get us all working and rowing in the same direction on this.
well, good luck and Godspeed, because it's killing us. We had 107,000 fentanyl deaths last year alone. So it's a national disaster. Mr. Cartwright?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, as a point of personal privilege, I want to thank you for putting together that amazing prescription and illicit drug summit that Congressman Clyde and I were happy to attend as well last week. That's right, 107,000 dead people in a year from fentanyl. And this is a bipartisan issue, a bipartisan effort. It is an American crisis. And sure, your part is guns, not drugs, but guns and drugs go together. You said it earlier. Just last Thursday, the United States and Mexico issued a joint statement announcing that the two countries have struck an agreement that will involve the U.S. doing more to stem the flow of firearms that are arming the cartels, empowering the cartels to put together drugs, put together the precursor chemicals that the Chairman was talking about, and ship them into the United States one way or another. It seems like a strong step going forward. It was announced that ATF, through Operation Southbound, would be targeting southbound flowing firearms and working with Mexican counterparts to increase firearms tracing to identify and stop the sourcing of firearms exports into Mexico through new authorities from the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that Mr. Gonzalez just talked about. Director, as you may know, the House has carried report language on the issue of firearms trafficked into Mexico for years and has encouraged ATF to work with its federal partners, including DHS, to that end. Can you elaborate on ATF efforts prior to last week's announcement to stem the flow of firearms across the southern border?
As I said, and you referred to Operation Southbound, we work together with our federal partners, which includes HSI, right, and the DEA. We work with our local partners on these firearms trafficking task forces. There are 9 along the border to focus on this. I have gone and met with local law enforcement partners in the Southwest United States repeatedly on this effort. And Congress, as you say, has provided really important tools. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act gave us the first ever federal firearms trafficking statute and the first ever standalone firearms straw purchasing statute, both of which were used and have been used with this particular focus in cases already. The first sentencing happened in Texas just a month or so ago of somebody convicted, 231 firearms being trafficked to the cartels. That person got, the judge I think gave an 80-month sentence under that new law. And that is, we have done over 30 defendants have been prosecuted, and I think it's growing every day on these new tools we have. So our job is, when you give us a new tool, we will do our best to squeeze every ounce of public safety we can out of that with the money that you decide to give ATF.
Well, our subcommittee is about funding. Do you anticipate Operation Southbound will require additional resources?
Everything we do at ATF begins and ends with public safety, and I could not think of a more significant public safety threat than the southbound traffic of firearms. Actually, there's a lot that might be tied, but that's right there. And I would imagine that in order to implement the Bipartisan Safer Community Act, yes, that will be among the places where we would place additional resources to try to enforce those statutes.
And regrettably, I have to ask the corollary question, which is if Operation Southbound suffers a 22% cut in funding, what will the effect of that be?
A 22% cut in funding for ATF, as I said before, we don't have that kind of fat. Over 2,500 of our 5,000 employees are special agents, so over half just do that provision, and 75% of our budget is directly enforcement related. And even in the 25% that's not, there's lab services, there's things that are, I think most people would say would hurt operations directly. So it would absolutely hurt our ability to stem that traffic.
And you said it doesn't cut fat. You skipped past muscle. You said it cuts right into the bone, didn't you?
Yes.
Thank you for appearing before us today, Director. Yield back.
Have you your agents encountered the cartels recently?
I think there are probably a number of cases that we are investigating that relate to cartel activity.
Has there been any convictions?
I am quite sure that there have been, the cartels, again, I want to be careful about speaking out of my expertise, but I know enough to say that the cartels are multi-billion-dollar criminal organizations that have layers and tentacles, and there are many, many cases all over the United States in places far from the border that have direct relation to cartels, and we work on a lot of them with our state and local partners and federal partners all the time.
So it's common to encounter the cartels in your regular everyday work?
Yeah, yes, I can't say the son of, as you mentioned, the son of a head of a cartel, but in our everyday work, we deal with violent drug trafficking organizations, many of whom are supplied or have direct relationships or are part of various cartels. We work with national gang organizations also, as you brought up. There's a variety of criminal, far right-wing and sometimes left-wing extremist organizations that are violent in nature. These criminal organizations, these are organizations that we see at ATF quite frequently.
Do you need any further congressional action to enable you to do your job?
Well, other than the kind of action that this committee obviously focuses on, which we are in dire need of, look, we will do, at ATF, we are a law enforcement agency first and foremost. With whatever, the debates that happen here are important, they're passionate. With whatever resources, laws, tools you give us, we will keep doing what we've always done. We will go every day out there running towards the gunfire, the men and women who work for me, not me, right? They're the heroes. We will try to do everything we can with whatever you give us, based on whatever policy determinations you make.
Mr. Clyde?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I understand that ATF has not released its fiscal year 2021 firearms compliance inspection statistics. We have all of 2019, we have all of 2020, we have 2022, and we actually even have up to March of 2023, but ATF has not released 2021. My question is, why has it not been released, and when will it be released?
We are committed to transparency. I'm learning about this. If that hasn't happened, that needs to happen. I don't know. I will check on it.
Would you please provide it to this committee?
Yes.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. In the first page of your testimony here, you say one of the main priorities of the ATF is processing the timely registration and transfer of firearms under the National Firearms Act. What is your definition of timely?
It's not what it is now. We need to get those processing and wait times down lower.
I get that.
And so, as quickly as possible, right? I mean, I think
what is your goal? I mean, if you don't have a goal to work toward, then, I mean, when I look at processing times, I looked 20 years ago, and the processing times haven't changed. I mean, I'm looking at, forms that literally were approved this month, and it's 7 to 9 months for an NFA form to be approved on a Form 4. I look at a Form 3, and it's 5 days.
In defense of, not of the Times, but of our agency, we process a greater volume of forms than we ever have before. I think
get that.
800,000 over the last year. The application numbers are also going up, so we have to match that, right? That's not an excuse, it's an explanation.
Okay.
And I will get back, I don't know that I can sit here and commit to a particular time limit on the spot here, but I can say that we will respond to you and set a goal. We will set a goal.
I mean, Judge Carter said it was years ago, 100 days. I have seen it as low as 5 weeks, where Form 4s have come back in 5 weeks. When Washington DC, when the NFA was transferred to Martinsburg, West Virginia, all right? That was great, fantastic move. So I would appreciate that if you would get back to me with what your goal is and then your plan to get to that goal, because I think reprioritizing your funding, okay, to make sure that you work toward that goal would be very important to achieving that goal.
That is an important function of ATF. It is one of many priorities. Getting our tracing time
I get it.
down is crucially important as well.
Speaking of tracing, thank you for that segue. Rep. Cloud sent a letter last year, February the 3rd, and it took 14 months for the ATF to respond to that letter. 36 members of Congress signed it and requested it, and it had to do with tracing. So how much of ATF's budget goes to digitizing out-of-business records in a database?
I am not sure of the exact number. I can get back to you with that number. Obviously, we receive
How much?
We receive tens of millions of paper records at ATF.
Okay.
They come in
Okay,
waterlogged boxes sometimes. It's
get it.
incredibly difficult task. These are also sort of...
Is the digital
sorry.
database that is being created a searchable database?
We are, as far as I know, the only customer that pays additional money to have search function taken out of Adobe Acrobat.
So how is it searchable?
We do not search in the specific ways that Congress has said that we can't search, right? So by personal identifier, by the way, right? We search by, we run
Okay.
serial numbers.
Okay.
And I will say that that is a policy decision that Congress make. That does make traces
Okay.
take longer
According to
in
the
criminal
NTC,
cases.
According to this letter, the NTC is only authorized to trace a firearm for a law enforcement agency when the firearm is involved in a bona fide criminal investigation. That's according to the letter that we finally got, the response that came April 14th, 2023. Do you agree with that? Only a bona fide criminal investigation?
Our state and local, most traces come from your local police department, your sheriff's department, as requests to us. And we work with them, and we trust our state and local partners they submit things when they're subject to a criminal investigation that a state and local law enforcement, a sheriff, a police chief, a commander has.
Well, I think that's important because the letter also asked for NCIC codes, and there are 420 codes that were provided, and the number of traces per year from 2019, 2020, 2021. Because if a federal firearms licensee gets more than 25 traces, then they're responsible to participate in the Demand 2 program. And in looking at some of these traces, I mean, you've got 132,000 traces on a found firearm. You've got 27,566 traces related to health and safety. 2,000 related to drugs, health and safety. 89 to food, health and safety. Cosmetics, health and safety. 13 related to abortion. I don't see the crime here with all these traces.
You said those are the NCIC. The C stands for criminal,
Right.
NCIC.
Right.
We are state and local law enforcement partners. We support police and trust police departments to submit traces when they relate to criminal investigations that they're conducting.
Okay, thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Cartwright?
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Director, thank you so much for being with us for an extended period of time here. Thanks for your staff as well, and all the agents and the personnel that you supervise. But we thank you personally for taking on this chore, this responsibility. It's a tough job against a tough problem that the country faces, and we salute you and your colleagues for taking it on. And we stand with you. We'll support you in any way that we can. So this concludes today's hearing. Thank you to our members and witnesses as well for attending. Without objection, all members will have 7 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. The hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr.